My name is Elena Carter, and I'm 30. Last night, I think I witnessed the shortest engagement in human history. Technically, it did not even last long enough to become real. In my head, if there had been judges standing somewhere nearby with stopwatches, they would have called it negative 45 seconds. It collapsed so fast, it felt like the moment erased itself before it was even finished. And the worst part was not that Jason stopped loving me. It was that I finally understood what his love had really become. Jason, well, I should probably start getting used to saying ex-boyfriend, had been in my life for 5 years. 5 whole years. Long enough to know the way he took his coffee, the songs he butchered on purpose just to make me laugh, and the moods he slipped into when something bothered him, but he did not want to admit it. Long enough that the future had started to feel less like a dream and more like a place I was already quietly decorating in my head. For a long time, we were good. Not perfect, but real. He used to be easy to love. He liked quiet nights, long drives, little places with no audience. He once told me the best moments in life were the ones no one else saw. That was before everything became performance. It happened slowly enough that I almost excused it. At first, it was little things. He wanted better lighting at restaurants because the pictures looked flat. He rejected places he used to love because they did not fit the image he had in his head. He started using words like aesthetic and elevated as if ordinary joy needed branding before it counted. Last year, I booked us a cabin in the mountains for our anniversary. It had a stone fireplace, hiking trails, and the kind of silence that feels expensive because it cannot be faked. I thought he would love it because the Jason I had fallen for would have loved it. Instead, he spent the first few hours complaining that the woods were too dark for photos and the cabin was too rustic for the kind of content he liked posting. I remember standing there, groceries in my arms, looking out at the trees, and feeling something small and uneasy move through me. Not enough to leave, not enough to start a fight, just enough to notice that I was still trying to live inside our relationship while he seemed more interested in displaying it. His friends only made that worse. They were polished, loud, and casually cruel, in the way people can be when they mistake mockery for taste. A few weeks ago, one of their friends got engaged, and I happened to be nearby, while Jason and two of his friends picked apart the ring photo like judges on a panel. One laughed and asked if the fiancé had gone bargain shopping. Another said the cut looked dated. Jason did not start it, but he joined in just enough to make my stomach turn. What bothered me was not the joke itself. It was how natural it sounded coming out of his mouth. That should have warned me. But love has a way of making women explain away the very things that should stop them cold. So when Jason proposed to me yesterday, I thought maybe I had been wrong about where we were heading. He took me to the scenic overlook where we had our first real date 5 years ago. He had packed champagne, fancy cheese, fruit, all the little things that look thoughtful on the surface. The sun was setting. The whole place was washed in gold. It should have felt intimate. Instead, it felt staged. When he got down on one knee, my heart still reacted before my mind did. For one suspended second, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe beneath all the polish and image chasing, the man I used to know was still there. Maybe he had remembered who we used to be. Then he opened the box, and my face fell before I could stop it. Not because the gesture meant nothing. It was because the ring told me exactly how little he understood me. At the center was a diamond, bright and expensive and completely generic. It was the kind of ring that looked like it had been selected from a mental checklist of things other people would approve of. Flashy, safe, predictable. Nothing about it felt personal. Nothing about it felt like me. Jason saw my expression change, and instead of looking concerned, he looked confused. "Elena," he said, still holding the box open. "What's wrong?" I looked from the ring to him, then around at the empty overlook, the fading light, the total lack of anyone else there. And suddenly it hit me. This was not a proposal built around me. It was a proposal built around what he thought an engagement was supposed to look like. I swallowed and asked quietly, "You planned a proposal, but somehow forgot the person you were proposing to." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I looked back at the ring. I mean, this could have been for anyone. There's nothing of me in it. At first, he seemed to think I was joking. Then a different look crossed his face, something sharper, more defensive. "I thought the ring would be enough," he said. "Just us." I looked back down at the ring. He must have mistaken my hesitation for emotion because he smiled slightly, like he thought I was overwhelmed. But I was not overwhelmed. I was disappointed. He misread that too. "What?" he asked. You don't like it? I took a breath, trying to be careful. It's beautiful in a general sense, Jason, but it's just a diamond. It doesn't feel like me. The change in him was immediate. He stood up too fast, the softness draining from his face. Are you serious right now? I should have softened it. I should have stepped around the truth the way I always had before. But something in me was too tired. I'm saying it feels generic, I said. Like you pick the ring people expect instead of thinking about who I actually am. He stared at me, stunned for half a second, and then gave a short laugh with no warmth in it. Unbelievable, he muttered. I spend this kind of money. I plan all of this, and you stand there criticizing it because it's not unique enough? I felt my pulse stumble. I had not insulted him. I had only told the truth gently, but Jason already looked like the injured one. You proposed to me at an empty overlook with no photographer, no setup, no real plan beyond the ring, I said. It feels like you copied what you thought was romantic instead of thinking about me. He stared at me like I had humiliated him. Then he said the thing that ended everything. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Embarrassing. The word landed harder than I expected. Not because he was angry. Because he was angry for the wrong reason. This was supposed to be a turning point in our lives, and all he could think about was how the scene felt from the outside. I looked at him, at the ring still sitting in that open box, and realized that even now he did not understand the problem. He thought I was rejecting the ring. What I was actually rejecting was the emptiness behind it. He kept talking after that, filling the silence with irritation disguised as reason. You're overreacting. I'm not saying this can't be fixed. I'm saying you could have handled this better. You know how important a moment like this is. I did not answer. I do not remember much about the drive home except the sound of his sighs and the strange quiet forming inside me. It was not peace. It was clarity. Painful, clean clarity. The kind that arrives when someone finally says enough for you to stop doubting what you already know. By the time we pulled into the apartment lot, I felt hollowed out. Inside, Jason acted like I had ruined something precious. He kicked off his shoes, tossed his keys down, and announced that he was too emotionally overwhelmed to talk. Then he disappeared into the bedroom and shut the door, leaving me alone in the living room with the kind of silence that does not feel peaceful anymore. I sat on the couch in the dark and replayed the whole evening. The ring, the overlook, the empty performance of intimacy, the way he said embarrassing as if his pride mattered more than my heart. Around midnight, I opened my laptop because I could not stand sitting there with nothing but my own thoughts. The browser was already open, and there it was, the tab I had left sitting there for weeks, half joke, half daydream. The local Ford dealership, my build for a dark green Bronco. I stared at it for a long time, and somewhere between the hurt and the silence, that Bronco stopped looking like a vehicle. It started looking like an exit. I did not sleep. By 6 a.m, I was done pretending I might wake up inside a different version of my life. I sat up from the couch, stiff and exhausted, and looked toward the bedroom door Jason had shut behind him, like that gave him moral authority. Then I got dressed, grabbed my keys, my wallet, and left without making a sound. The hallway outside was cold and quiet, the kind of early morning quiet that makes the world feel briefly honest before everyone wakes up and starts performing again. The jewelry store was just opening when I arrived. Sarah, the owner, looked up from behind the counter and smiled automatically, then saw my face and the box in my hand. Her smile vanished. "Oh, honey," she said softly. That almost broke me. I set the ring box on the counter and kept my hand on it for a second. He proposed, I said, and somehow the whole thing still felt like it had nothing to do with me. Sarah frowned, gently opened the box, and looked down at the ring. "It's beautiful," she said, "but I can already tell that isn't why you're here." So I gave her the short version, the overlook, the empty gesture, the way Jason cared more about the performance of romance than the substance of it, the way he made me feel as though I had failed him by not reacting the way he wanted. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she exhaled and said, "A woman can be given a beautiful ring and still feel completely unseen." That line hit me harder than I expected, because that was it exactly. Unseen. Not unloved in the dramatic movie sense, just unseen in the quiet, devastating way that matters more. I admitted that I should probably have known sooner. Sarah told me that seeing the best in someone is not foolish, but staying once the truth becomes undeniable is the place women begin betraying themselves. I stood there in the morning light and realized I had not come in to save the ring. I had come in to decide whether I was finally going to choose myself. Sarah offered me a full refund. I blinked at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said. "I want to. A few minutes later, I walked out with a cashier's check for $10,000 in my hand. The responsible voice in my head immediately told me to take it straight to the bank and put it back into savings. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have listened. But humiliation has a strange way of burning through old habits. I had spent too long being patient, careful, mature, accommodating. And where had all of that gotten me? Standing on an overlook while a man turned a proposal into a complaint about how the moment felt. So instead of driving to the bank, I drove to the Ford dealership. The lot shimmered in the morning light. Rows of polished vehicles sat there like answers to questions I had not known I was finally ready to ask. I parked, stepped out, and spotted my Bronco almost immediately. Dark green, strong lines, unapologetic. It did not look elegant or delicate or designed to impress anyone. It looked like something built to get through rough terrain without asking for approval first. A salesman approached me with that bright, eager energy people in sales perfect early. "Good morning," he said. "Looking for anything in particular?" I pointed at the Bronco. "That one." He smiled. "Excellent choice." He started talking features and financing, but I barely heard him. I was still looking at the Bronco, like it had shown up at exactly the moment I needed proof that a different life was possible. Eventually, he paused and asked more gently, "Big day?" I let out a breath. "You could say that." Then, because truth had started coming easier by then, I added, "I just walked away from the shortest engagement in recorded history, and I'd rather put $10,000 into something that won't make me feel small." His eyebrows rose, but to his credit, he did not laugh. 2 hours later, after signatures, paperwork, and the most satisfying transfer of money I have ever made, the Bronco was mine. When I sat behind the wheel, I had to grip the steering wheel for a second and breathe. The interior smelled like new leather, clean plastic, and possibility. It should have been ridiculous how emotional that made me, but it wasn't really about the truck. It was about choosing something for myself without asking whether anyone else would approve. I started the engine. The sound was low, steady, and real. And for the first time since the overlook, I felt relief. Not because the hurt was gone. It wasn't. Jason's voice still echoed in my head. Embarrassing. Overreacting. Handle it better. But now there was something else in the car with me. Movement. By the time I pulled back onto my street, I knew one thing for certain. I was not walking back into that apartment as the same woman who had left it. I parked the Bronco just slightly off-center in front of the building. Not enough to be obnoxious, just enough to be noticed. Then I locked it, listened to the cheerful chirp of the key fob, and walked upstairs. Jason was in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, already wearing the expression of a man who had spent the morning composing a version of events in which he was the victim. "There you are," he said. "I was starting to think you were ignoring me." I set my keys down and looked at him carefully. Not angrily, just clearly. He looked annoyed, not worried, not remorseful, annoyed. "Are you ready to talk about what happened yesterday?" he asked. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the key fob, and gave it a small jingle. Outside, the Bronco chirped. Jason froze. "What was that?" "My car," I said. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You already have a car." "I do," I said calmly. "Now I have a better one." I picked up my bag as if I might leave again, and that was when the control started slipping out of his hands. "Elena," he snapped, "don't walk away. We're not done here." I turned back slowly. "Actually, I think we are, at least for right now." His jaw tightened. "You don't get to disappear for half a day and come back acting like everything's fine. I needed space to process what you did." What I did. There it was again. That quiet rewriting of reality where my reaction was the problem, not the thing that caused it. "I handled something that needed to be handled," I said. His eyes flicked to my empty hands. "They didn't even take it back, did they? Custom rings are hard to return." "I returned it," I said. "Full refund." Silence dropped into the room. For a second, relief crossed his face, but it twisted quickly into calculation. "Good," he said. "Then we can fix this properly. We'll go back together and pick something better." "I already used the money." That stopped him cold. "What do you mean you used it?" I lifted the key fob slightly. His face changed. "No?" "Yes." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his expression tightened with real fury. "You spent $10,000 on a car instead of fixing this?" I held his gaze. "I spent $10,000 on something I actually wanted." That hit him harder than the amount. Not because of the money. Because of the word wanted. Not approved, not negotiated, not explained away. Wanted. He ran a hand through his hair and stared at me, like I had become someone else overnight. "This is unbelievable," he said. "You disappear, make an impulsive decision, and now you're acting like it means something?" "It does." That was when something in his face shifted from irritation to something closer to panic. Because for the first time, he was no longer dealing with the version of me who would smooth everything over. He was dealing with someone he did not recognize. Good. I moved toward the door again, but later that evening I came back because I knew the real confrontation still had to happen. When I walked in, Jason was waiting in the living room, arms crossed, posture rigid. Elena, he said, we're going to talk about this right now. I set my bag down slowly. I assumed so. He stepped closer and took on that almost generous tone people use when they think they are offering mercy. I've had time to think, he said, and I'm willing to move past what happened yesterday. I just looked at him. We can fix it. We'll go back, pick out a proper ring, do this the right way. Another chance, another performance, another version of the same emptiness, dressed up as progress. Oh, the ring, I said lightly. That's not going to happen. He stared at me. What do you mean? I returned it this morning. Full refund. His jaw hardened. You already told me that. That's why I said we can... And I used the money, I added. He went still. As a down payment, I said. For the car. That was when everything snapped. You spent our money on a car? There it was. I straightened slightly. No, I spent my money. That was for our future. It was for a ring, I said. A ring that proved you didn't know me nearly as well as I kept pretending you did. That's not the point. It is the point. The room seemed to tighten around us. You embarrassed me yesterday, he said. You turned what should have been a huge moment into a mess. I looked at him and felt the last of my doubt fall away. You made your choice at that overlook, I said. You didn't want honesty. You wanted a reaction that made you feel successful. The second I gave you the truth, you acted like I had failed you. His mouth opened, then closed again. You're being dramatic. No, I said, I'm being accurate. That landed harder than yelling would have. Then, exactly as I expected, he reached for backup. He grabbed his phone and called one of his friends, already setting up the version where I was irrational and cruel. When the woman answered, I stepped close enough to speak clearly. What's going on, I said, is that Jason proposed to me with a ring that felt like it had been chosen for appearances, not for me. I told him the truth. He called the whole thing embarrassing, so I returned it and spent the money on something I actually wanted. The woman on speaker sounded horrified, but not for the right reason. You can't just do that, she snapped. Do you know how selfish that sounds? He didn't just hurt my feelings, I said. He showed me exactly what matters to him. And it wasn't me. Jason muttered, don't twist it like that. I ignored him. You all saw the ring? I asked into the phone. No, of course not. Because there was no audience. That was the problem. Silence. Then the predictable answer. You're overreacting. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I finally reacted the right amount. I ended the call. Jason stared at me as if hanging up on his friend had crossed some impossible line. You're throwing away 5 years over this, he said. I shook my head slowly. No, I'm recognizing they were already gone. That took the fight out of him for a second. Then I gave him the part he could not argue with. I want you out by the end of the week. His head snapped up. What? This is my apartment, my lease, my name. I'll give you a few days to pack your things. You can't just... I can. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The certainty was enough. The last few days did not explode. They unraveled, quietly. Boxes appeared, drawers emptied, closets lost weight. Jason moved around the apartment like someone still hoping the scene might reverse itself if he waited long enough. At one point, he asked if we could just reset and take a step back. As if love were a page that could be refreshed, I said. He later asked if I was really ending 5 years over one mistake. I looked at him and said, You didn't make a mistake. You told the truth. You just didn't expect me to believe you. After that, things moved faster. By the afternoon of the third day, his things were stacked by the door, 3 suitcases and a few bags. He stood in the middle of the apartment one last time and looked around as if he still expected something to stop him. I stayed where I was. Not cold, not cruel, just done. This is really it, he said. No, I replied. This is just where you finally saw it. He told me I would regret this, but there was no conviction in it, just habit. The last line of a script that no longer matched the scene. Then he picked up his bags and left. No apology, no revelation, no redemption. Just the quiet sound of a door closing behind 5 years of my life. The apartment felt lighter the second he was gone. Not happier yet, but cleaner. A few hours later, I grabbed my keys and headed downstairs. The Bronco chirped when I unlocked it. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and adjusted the mirror. As I pulled out onto the street, I saw him standing on the sidewalk with 3 suitcases at his feet, phone in hand, waiting for a ride. For a moment, our eyes met through the windshield. There was no superiority left in his face. No polish. No control. Just uncertainty. like he was finally realizing that whatever happened next, I would not be the one fixing it for him. I slowed just slightly. Not enough to stop, just enough to make the moment clear. Then I smiled, calm and unbothered, and gave the horn 2 light taps. Honk, honk. Simple, final. Then I pressed the gas and drove forward, leaving him, the luggage, and that entire version of my life behind me. In the rearview mirror, he got smaller, then gone. I kept driving. Not because I knew exactly where I was going, but because for the first time in a long time, I was no longer waiting for someone else to decide what my future was supposed to look like. He wanted something impressive, something polished from the outside. He just never realized the woman standing in front of him was supposed to be the real prize. I guess he learned that too late. But that is not my problem anymore.